My name is Matthew Rohrs. I serve as the CEO at Sinapis and am so thankful for you taking the time to join with us today to talk about our Multiplier impact study. And we're really excited about this. Impact is a passion at Sinapis. We call it monitoring, evaluation, and learning is the department that we devote to this, but more broadly from our founding days, really wanting to understand what kind of impact can entrepreneurs have in the lives of the poor, in the communities where they serve, and in the advance of God's truth. And this is an important step for us in that regard. And so we're excited to share more about that. I did just mention, but for anyone else who has come on, we're going to have Q&A for about the final 20 minutes of our time. So if you have questions along the way, please submit those in the chat. I'm really excited to introduce a couple of my colleagues who are going to be doing the lion's share of the presentation today. Sylvie Somerville is our Director of Product and Partnership and leads monitoring and evaluation at Sinapis. She's actually calling in from Egypt today, so we're going to be straining potentially bandwidth and technology, but I think we're going to do just fine there. But Sylvie really spearheaded this effort and again leads the studies and the ongoing work that we do in understanding the impact of the entrepreneurs that we serve. And Yvette Ondachi is our East Africa Regional Director. She's based in Nairobi. So for all of you that are calling from that part of the world, thank you for joining us in your evening. Yvette's been with us for about a year and provides leadership to our East Africa teams in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. So as we begin, I'm going to share my screen. I've got a relatively brief presentation. We've got a few things that we want to share with you on slides throughout our time. So let me do that. So for those of you that may not know Sinapis well, I wanted to begin just with a little bit of grounding of who are we as an organization? What do we care most deeply about? And for us, the mission of our organization is to make disciples of Jesus Christ and alleviate poverty through the power of entrepreneurship. We believe that entrepreneurs are special catalysts for growing companies that have influence for God's kingdom in a variety of ways, and that they're strategically placed to create and sustain jobs, which we believe is the best way to alleviate poverty, and to create economic engines for God's kingdom and specifically for the local church. To give you a sense of our history, we began training entrepreneurs in Nairobi, Kenya in 2011. On this slide, you can see that over the last 11 years, we've now trained over 7,000 entrepreneurs with a global footprint of 11 countries. 1,622 of those that we've engaged broadly have completed programs. And that number is really important in the slides that I'm going to share in the next few minutes. We consider those that complete programs as essentially crossing our threshold for attribution, or to say that another way, we feel like we've spent enough time with them that it makes sense to include them in our annual impact survey. So that's 1,622 is a very, very important group of those that we've served over time. And then we have an accelerator program, which is a much more hands-on 6-month experience where we assess each business on the front end, and then we provide a custom roadmap for those entrepreneurs to scale their companies. Today, we're going to be talking about impact from really 3 different dimensions, and we're going to be keying in on this idea of indirect impact. But I wanted to ground this in 2 other concentric circles that you see on this slide in front of you. And if you look all the way to the left, the direct effect of what we do at Sinapis. So this is through the entrepreneurs that we train, the companies that we accelerate, those that we do some bespoke advisory for. But what we're looking for in terms of impact directly with the entrepreneurs we serve and the companies that they create can be summarized in 3 major areas. We introduce people to what it means to follow Christ. So that may be for some coming into relationship with him for the first time. For most of those that we serve, they're already Christians, but they're saying, how can I gain the skills and the vision and the tools to grow a company that advances God's kingdom with great intentionality? And they are engines, I mentioned this a moment ago, engines for the advancement of the gospel. And I'll show you what some of those statistics look like in a moment. We also care deeply about jobs. We believe jobs are the best way to alleviate poverty. So that can be jobs that are created, jobs that are sustained. When we think back over the past couple of years with COVID, the ability to just stay in business and sustain jobs is having tremendous impact. And then lastly, generosity. As entrepreneurs grow in their understanding that their business isn't just for them or for their family, but that God has given them ideas and skills and capabilities to become a generous leader in a community. So when we look directly at those that we serve, we summarize that. We've got a really broad impact dashboard. We summarize Jesus, jobs, and generosity. But if you look out one ripple effect or concentric circle out from that, we recognize that every job that gets created supports additional dependents. So we're calling this the dependent effect. And we apply a conservative estimate that each job created by one of the alumni that graduates from our program supports 5 additional people. That could be a spouse, that could be children, that could be parents, nieces, nephews. Sometimes it's children in the community. And if you've spent time in frontier markets, you understand what that dynamic looks like. We've seen other organizations estimate that dependent effect as high as a 10 times multiple. We conservatively think each job affects at least 5 other people. So there's a dependent level to that. But what we're really keying in on in this study is, what about the indirect effect? What kind of an impact does a kingdom business have on suppliers, on smallholder farmers, on the local church? And so this study with this particular entrepreneur, Rabboni, was really meant for our first time to intentionally study, what does that next level of impact look like as companies grow and have greater influence in a community? So the way that we understand transformation, we use a tool called a theory of change. And I just want to briefly highlight this because all of our direct impact data flows out of this theory of change. So just to take a moment on this, we equip, if you start at the top, we equip kingdom entrepreneurs across the 11 countries that we serve in. Now, one asterisk or caveat to put with that is we do not have a faith screen on the front end of those that we work with. So if someone comes and says, I'm not a Christian, but I'd really like to participate, they could be an atheist, an agnostic, or they may be an adherent to another faith. As long as they understand who we are and that we integrate biblical principles, they are absolutely welcome. But our ultimate goal is to see people be trained who are followers of Christ. So as we equip them with programs and acceleration, they build kingdom businesses, moving down to that second circle. As those businesses grow, they're building and growing the local economy. And that's where job creation is happening, growth in GDP, which fundamentally is the driver for material poverty alleviation. But as we all know, as entrepreneurs grow a company, they gain influence in the society, and they have a greater and greater ability to transform business culture and transform the community around them. And one key way that we look at that is taking a stand against corruption, fighting for truth and ethics. And then lastly, coming full circle, is kingdom entrepreneurs who understand what God has given them in that business have an amazing opportunity to make disciples of Christ who multiply. So they can do that directly in their business, but to say it for the third time in the webinar, they've got an opportunity to create an economic engine that fuels the growth of local ministries, of the local church. So if you've never thought about it this way, every local church, every nonprofit, ultimately every government depends on for-profit businesses, the free cash flow that they generate for their very existence. And so these economic engines play a vital role in helping people find and follow Jesus. So that's how we describe our theory of change. Our impact dashboard tracks with each of these 5 elements. I want to just share a couple of highlights. Again, these are the direct impacts and then reaching to that dependent effect before we go and look at the indirect. So from a business impact perspective, this data is all as of December 31st, 2021. Our 1,622 alums were generating just shy of $86 million in total annual revenue. They had raised over $66 million in capital. I think most importantly, in a time that we've been living through over the last couple of years, 73% of these companies are still in business 3 years after they graduate from a program. And the average growth in revenue their first year after training is 113%. So as we look at these amazing entrepreneurs that we serve, they are having really incredible business impact. But that's not the only thing that they're doing. From a social impact perspective, we're really looking here at a couple of things: jobs and fighting against corruption. Total jobs, just shy of 8,900 jobs. Here's where you see that 5 times multiplier put into place, supporting almost 45,000 people. They've created over 5,400 new jobs, and 82% of those that we've worked with, who when they first come to us in our baseline survey admit, sometimes I offer or I accept bribes, later take a stand to say, I am trusting that I can follow God's will for ethics in the marketplace and I can still be successful. We're incredibly proud of their courage, because that takes such faith to take that stand when it feels like the air around you is just full of that expectation that you would participate in corruption. And then lastly, spiritually. So we talked about kingdom business people and making disciples who multiply. 86% of our graduates launch spiritual or social impact programs. 75% report they're actively integrating their faith into their business. And 51%, this is the highest number we've ever seen, are reporting that they've seen new followers of Christ through their company, which is absolutely amazing. We're so excited to see the Lord continue to stir and to see an integration of faith and work in this way. So if I come back to the slide again to just frame our discussion, I just gave you a picture of the direct effect: Jesus, jobs, generosity, that 5 times multiplier as it applies to jobs that are created, jobs that are sustained. But when we look at indirect effect in this study, I want to transition this over, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, over to my colleague, Sylvie. And Sylvie, I'd love it if you could tell us about why is indirect impact something that we wanted to study, and what were the goals for the multiplier study that we performed last year?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So for those who might be unfamiliar or new to this space, this whole concept of indirect impact is something that I would say really the development space has been pushing on pretty heavily for the past few years, of trying to help organizations, like Matthew mentioned, estimate that the impact that you're having as a company is not just the people you hire. There's spillover effects. There's a lot of different terms for this concept, but there are a lot of other people who benefit from the work that you're doing. That could be as simple as people who use your product and their life is changed by that product. It could be suppliers who sell to you, and because your business is doing well, now their business is doing well. It could be, students who are benefiting from the structures that you're creating that enable them to have a better livelihood. So part of what we're doing with this study is digging into that a little bit and joining the rest of the literature around this for what does that indirect impact look like. So it comes in kind of many terms. Sometimes it's called indirect job, sometimes it's called indirect impact, to differentiate between a person who might actually get employment as an indirect result of the company, or it could just be someone who experiences some kind of improvement in livelihood because of the work of that company. Sometimes it's called informal impact instead of formal impact. So really, I would say in the last year, we've been pushing into how do we understand this? How do we kind of accurately report on what we believe our real impact at Sinapis is, and more importantly, the real impact of the companies that we're supporting around the world. So we also calculated, Matthew showed some are impacted as a result of the work that your company does. And I think I'm back. We asked our alumni how many other people are impacted, and to try to help us understand what kinds of people are those. Tell us a little bit about what they're like. So we find very conservatively 250,000 people are impacted indirectly by Sinapis alumni. And those could be kind of some of the groups that I've mentioned. Could be students, could be suppliers, could be vendors, could be farmers, could be marginalized women who are offered kind of job support through these companies, could be other small businesses. So we're really excited about that. It's been really interesting to go through that data and not just look at this Rabboni lens and the impact they're having on smallholder farmers, but to kind of look more broadly and say, what does this look like at Sinapis? And I think really this is what the whole point of this study was for us at Sinapis. Matthew has mentioned that we're a learning organization, and I would say that characterizes what we wanted to do with this study. It was really an inquiry into what does this even look like? We need to even know the questions to ask. So sometimes you have to start your research from that perspective. Like, what are we going to find? Because that helps us understand how to better ask questions, how to better structure our programs, how to better offer support in the future. Because for us, a lot of these things are also new. There's not tons of research written about this yet, and we want to understand what this spillover impact looks like from our alumni. So we really came at this study like, what are we going to learn? How can we learn as an organization how to do these studies? What kind of studies we want to do in the future? Is indirect impact happening? Is this premise that Matthew showed of the direct and indirect impact, is that what's really going on the field when we look at this with a really, really fine-tooth comb? We also really, at Sinapis, we train, Matthew showed the graphic of, we've trained over 7,000 people. The people that we work the most with and spend more man hours, more staff hours devoted to their growth over time would be what we now termed our multipliers. And our multipliers are those businesses that have the most significant potential to catalyze impact in their communities. So people who have the most potential to create jobs, to create indirect jobs, to transform what's around them. So not all businesses will create 100 jobs. Not all businesses are going to reach 3,000 farmers. But if we can find those people and really equip them with not only the business tools, but also kind of the skills, the tools to make disciples through their work and to teach people what this integration of faith and work looks like, we think that's where kind of the most impact is going to come. So in this study, we looked specifically at one of these multipliers called Rabboni, and we'll get into some of the details in a second. But Rabboni is a grain processor in Uganda. Rabboni first came into the Sinapis family in 2018. I met the director at Rabboni, Pamela, in 2018 when I was then new with Sinapis. She was in our very first class that we ever ran in Uganda. And Rabboni not only has a flourishing business that's seen some real strong growth over the past few years, but they as a management team, Pamela and her co-founders, are also really committed not only to impacting their community, but they're really committed to making disciples. And all of the founders really have a strong relationship with Jesus, and their company is about more than themselves. So for us, this was a good study to look at, an organization that we know cares about this vision, and we wanted to look at them as kind of a pilot test. What does the impact of one business look like if we equip one alumni with potential to scale, with passion for transforming the community? What does their spillover impact look like, and how excited can we kind of collectively get about what's possible with just the support of one business? So Pamela went through our 4-month growth stage program for entrepreneurs, the Sinapis Entrepreneur Academy. She did that in 2018. And then she went through our fast track accelerator. Again, we're putting the most support into multipliers that we believe have the most potential. So we have kind of an invite only accelerator that we run in Kenya and Uganda once a year. That's a 6-month program with a lot of intense one-on-one support. She went through that in 2019. They've also been supported by many other partners with similar mission. One of our partners, Talenton, is on this call. Talenton has also invested in Rabboni, which has significantly helped their ability to scale and deliver this impact. So we're really grateful not only for kind of the work that we've been able to do and how they've grown with that, but how other partners have catalyzed their impact. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what we learned through Rabboni and who they work with, the farmers they work with. But this is kind of the goal of what we were looking to do.
Yeah, it's great, Sylvie. Was everybody able to see? While she was talking, I pulled up just a couple of photos. Are those coming through okay on the shared screen?
Yes, they are.
Great. Yeah. So Pamela, who she was referencing, is here in the center of this photo. This is some of the manufacturing facility that they have. And then you see the new warehouse system that they're building. This again has happened through investment from our partners, Talenton. So excited about all that. So Yvette, I want to turn it over to you with your experience as an experienced entrepreneur prior to coming to Sinapis, leading an agribusiness called OJ Green for 5 years. Can you speak to what life is like for a smallholder farmer in East Africa? We can use that phrase, but what does a smallholder farmer mean? What are some of the challenges that they face?
Thank you, Matthew. Now, typically, smallholder households in East Africa represent between 50 to 70% of the population. So it's very, very significant. And typically they have less than 2 hectares of land. So that's, again, very, very little land. And then they also depend on rain-fed agriculture. Now, the thing is, they're disconnected to the marketplace in terms of they may not have a deep understanding of what markets need. So in terms of informing the decision of what to grow and when to grow. So typically we find them growing staples every now and again. Now, if you look at the collective potential of smallholder farmers, you will realize that if they were aggregated together and their potential was harnessed, they can be a strong resource in addressing issues like food security. But that is not happening because they are all fragmented, and their story is more often than not a story of despondency, a story of a loss of hope, and many of them cannot sustain their livelihood on farming alone. But for those who are resilient and make it through and are able to have a great crop, the biggest barrier and the biggest challenge that they face is access to markets. And it comes in more than one way. Sometimes because they're so disconnected with what the market needs, they're at the mercy of middlemen. And sometimes there are multiple layers of middlemen. And these middlemen have got a tendency of taking advantage of them. So they would come to a smallholder farmer and offer them a ridiculous price. They definitely are not making any profit. Chances are they have been cheated, they've been exploited. So a lot of smallholder farmers in East Africa and other parts of Africa are really at the hands of a lot of exploitation. Some of them get so frustrated that they refuse to sell their crop and say, no, I'd rather just take this and keep it and store it up for my family. So they have to supplement their income one way or another. And that just really builds to why Rabboni is such a unique and beautiful company, because Rabboni is a link. Rabboni understands what the marketplace needs. And as an aggregator, they're able to tap into the potential of these smallholder farmers and be able to give them hope. And, hope really does make a difference, because with that hope, they know that they're assured that they're going to get income. And if they're assured that they're going to get income, then they can take their kids to hospital if need be, because this is an out-of-pocket market. They can take their kids to school. They're able to make ends meet for their families. So it's very important that they do have somebody who will connect them to the markets. And that is something that Rabboni is doing. So in a summary, that really is what the smallholder farmers are. They do have a few other challenges as well. They lack access to current inputs. For example, seed development, you need to have, and this all takes a hit on their productivity. But the reason why I focused on the market is that is where the change begins. If you have access to market and you have money in your pocket, then you can buy those inputs that are required. They also can do very well with access to knowledge. What are some of the modern ways of agriculture to help them optimize on their land, produce more quality, produce more where they are? And having more players like Rabboni will be able to help them focus on these other aspects and help them to be more profitable. And really, just looking forward to the day that we harness all their potential and have them as a force to solve the aspect of food security, so we don't have to import our foods.
Yeah, to build on that a little bit, contrast for us, the role that a Ugandan company led by Ugandan entrepreneurs who are bringing some of the innovation and the transformation that you described, versus I think if you come from outside these markets, there's probably a temptation to think there's some other path that would be the best way to help smallholder farmers. And we could debate that, but I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to why scalable companies led by local entrepreneurs, why does that make such a difference? I think you were getting at it right there in your closing remarks, but I'd love to hear more, because again, you spent 5 years of your life coming out of a corporate pharmaceutical background, all kinds of opportunity and saying, I've got a passion for this. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. You know, what really shocked me was that majority of our farmers in East Africa were living below the poverty line. And because of that, some of the solutions that were being offered to them was not necessarily a solution, but more like a band-aid, if I could say so, because they would be subject to government subsidies. That is not the solution. You need a profitable enterprise that drives growth and gives them the promise for tomorrow. And really, that's why, as I said, there's so many reasons to be excited for companies like Rabboni and a local company doing it. The irony is, despite having so much arable land collectively, and also good weather patterns, if you ask me, relatively good weather patterns, it is absolutely ridiculous the amount of food that is imported because of poor production here and there. So the importance of companies like this scaling is that it builds local in-house production. And that understanding, it strengthens supply chains, it strengthens value chains, and it actually just makes a very, very positive difference. And that's why, for me, I just summarize it as hope, and just uplifting the face of the smallholder farmer. Because when a farmer gets paid, when a farmer is assured of payment, then they can plan for growth in their own level. Because the asset that they have is land. Most of this is family land. If they just need to harness it, that's what they have in their hands. And giving them that opportunity is really amazing, and it's transformative to communities.
That's great. So a quick reminder, if you've got any questions along the way, you can submit those in the chat. We are going to go to Q&A, but we've got one more section here. So thank you, Yvette. That's fantastic. Sylvie, I wondered if you could, I mean, again, the report is long and dense. I think for those that have read it, it shows, again, the commitment that we have. We really want to get to the bottom of these questions. We want to understand, again, direct impact, dependent effect, what happens then at this indirect level? And we put a lot of effort into that. But Sylvie, can you help us understand what were the key findings from the report?
Yeah, so I want to build on what Yvette was sharing about the farmers, because I think smallholder farmers is it's a term thrown around a lot, but one thing that we wanted to understand from the report is, how do we describe these people? What do they really look like for those who don't actually get to spend time with them on the field? Because like Yvette was saying, this makes up a huge percentage of the countries where Sinapis operates, both Sinapis and our partners. And we train entrepreneurs. Most of our entrepreneurs are educated and live in cities. And again, our premise is, if we invest in these multipliers who can create impact for others, they are in turn hiring and impacting many people at the bottom of the pyramid, which includes these farmers. But Matthew, I don't know if you want to share that slide that shows some of the demographics of what our farmers look like, but just some interesting findings here. Most of these farmers have 6 people in their household. 72% of them, we found all of this data through our study, have only attended some or all of primary school, so nothing beyond that. Only 10% use electricity, which is actually worse than the national Ugandan average. Only 4% own a vehicle. Over a third of the farmers we surveyed, when we surveyed 100 farmers that Rabboni works with, rely on surface water, which is also worse than the national average. 14% have houses built with bamboo, trees, or mud, which is a small number, but still the fact that any farmers are constructing houses using this is a tough statistic to hear. 44% do not eat 3 meals. 75%, however, own their own land. So you have a lot of farmers who have land. The land is productive, but very low levels of education and usage of these other things. So that just gives you kind of a snapshot of when I mentioned earlier that Sinapis works with probably 250,000 people who are impacted indirectly through our alumni. A really sizable number of that 250,000 would be smallholder farmers, such as those that we found in our study. So I think some things that we learned, and we surveyed 100 farmers over a 2-week period, several different areas around where Rabboni works. But Rabboni works with 3,500 farmers. We were surveying farmers that are supplying corn or maize, as they say in Africa. Rabboni has many claims about the impact that they create through their work. So again, they have this passion for the smallholder farmer. And I think one of the main things that we learned actually from this field study is actually the impact that they're stating they have is spot on, if not underrepresented. And I think to be able to kind of serve them in that way, but also prove what you say is in fact happening, that's significant because it's expensive to do these studies. It's easy to make broad sweeping impact claims. And I would say most organizations do that, right? Like, oh, we think that we have these kind of impacts, and it's easy to be overly optimistic. But we found that Rabboni really is right about the impact they're having, and probably again they're underreporting their impact. So that was really encouraging. But I think just to follow on from some of the things Yvette was saying, in general, what farmers shared with us, what do they get out of working with Rabboni and then the kind of cooperatives Rabboni works with? So basically in the supply chain of corn, you have someone like Rabboni who's collecting all the corn. They work with these cooperatives who are buying from the farmers, and then you have the farmers growing the corn. So what the farmers basically said is the cooperatives buy directly from the farmers. That eliminates middlemen. And if you've studied at all or worked at all in the agricultural supply chain, there are so many players sometimes in the supply chain, and this is where you have all these opportunities for exploitation, because these middlemen can ask whatever price they want, and the farmers have to pay because they usually don't have other options. Like Yvette was saying, they need someone to get their product to market. So they often rely on these middlemen to help them do that. So Rabboni in its supply chain eliminates that. That also improves the price that the farmers get for their maize. So the farmers that we surveyed on average all agreed that they're getting better prices. They not only said that, but then also the data that we collected kind of proved that the pricing that they were receiving over time was improving and better than market average. We also found that, again, Rabboni is providing market access, so the products aren't wasting at the farm. They're providing this regular, consistent supply for farmers to be able to bring their produce, and they're paying on time. And that was kind of consistently mentioned about Rabboni and the cooperatives they work with. They pay on time. So the farmers, again, like Yvette said, they have this consistent supply of income, and that is super important in just helping them smooth their purchases and be able to maintain their livelihoods. Rabboni and its cooperatives are also providing training, inputs, products that all increase the productivity of the farm input. So a lot of the farmers were mentioning this to us, that kind of the access to things and tools that they have through the cooperative and through the work Rabboni is doing is helping them be more productive, which again is increasing their revenues. So we found kind of across the sample, there's 5% growth in incomes of all these farmers just from the effects of working with Rabboni, which leads to more than $100,000 of kind of revenue increase across the farmers that they work with. And this, I think, you could hear that number and think 5%, okay, well, could we go for a bigger number? And I think what we're really encouraged by is, again, the survey that we did, the time period that we're looking at was during COVID. So again, in a time when almost everyone around the world was plummeting in their sales and revenues, we're seeing a 5% increase in incomes in that period, in a really tough part of the world to work during COVID. Again, despite the sector, it's a low margin sector, still we see this percentage growth. I think we are eager to see how we can help Rabboni even improve that. And so we had several recommendations in the report, which you're welcome to read on your own time if you're interested. But there are, and this is one of the other things we wanted to do with this report, is just how can we help Rabboni do their work better? What are we learning from the farmers that will help the farmers have an even greater increase in making sure the training is consistently applied across the entire sample, making sure that inputs are provided with the right kind of credit facilities, a number of other recommendations, and we're committed to following up with Rabboni on this later on this year, just to see like what role can Sinapis play. We're not in the agricultural supply chain business, but we are in the business of helping our alumni do their work better and create more impact. So this was one thing we wanted to figure out how we could do better, and to figure out how we can support these indirect impacts in a broader way through the work that we're doing at Sinapis. So I guess I will end there. But I think for us, again, it's encouraging to do one pilot study like this and just be able to kind of dream together of if this is one entrepreneur that we can train, it only costs a couple $100 to support one entrepreneur. If this is the kind of impact that you can see through supporting one entrepreneur, just imagine what it's like if we've graduated more than 1,000. So for us, that's really motivating. And yeah, we're excited to have you guys here with us to celebrate that.
That's great. Maybe one more quick one, Sylvie, although Yvette, if you want to weigh in on this before we go to Q&A. What are our future plans? So again, you mentioned this was a pilot study, framing this again, just for centering this. We've known, and for a long time from our very first year, deeply trying to understand direct impact. What does that mean for the lives of dependents? But this whole realm of potentially 250,000 people who are being impacted by these 1,600 entrepreneurs we've served. So this is a first study. What are we thinking as we build from here?
It's exciting, and we have a lot of ideas as a team about what we want to do. I think this question of indirect impact is something we want to push into more. So whether that's looking at a broader sample, whether it's looking at what about businesses that don't work with farmers, but they work with artisans or domestic workers or another kind of big group that makes up a lot of the workforce in East Africa. So I would say we want to kind of broaden potentially how many people we're looking at. I think there are a lot of other questions that we're interested in answering, some, on different sides of the spectrum of those could be questions related to more of the faith-based impact we're having. What does this actually look like in terms of business growth? I would say we have a lot of unanswered questions, and this report was a good test for us to explore a question, figure out what does it cost to do a study like this? What does the process look like? What did we learn? And then keep asking other questions, and hopefully work with organizations to help us answer those questions. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And just to weigh in and just add a little more, we want to be more intentional. Rabboni represents a group of entrepreneurs that we call the multipliers. So we are looking to identify multipliers and understand what is the area of support they need to help them increase and multiply their impact. So we see ourselves working with them very intentionally and giving them the support that they need to make this difference in whichever sector that they are in. Yes, because if 250,000 lives can be impacted indirectly, how does 10 million look like? So we keep going on, but very targeted and very, very focused.
Amen. Okay, well, we're going to open it up for Q&A. I do have a couple of questions already. Would love to hear, so I'm going to ask this first one, and then it looks like they're starting to come in and chat. What was the most challenging thing about conducting the study, working with 100 farmers in rural Uganda? What were the challenges that we faced?
I'll answer that. I have some of my colleagues on the call as well who actually did the field work. So feel free to jump in as well. But I think understanding the supply chain is kind of complex. So it took us a while to figure that out. And again, it's not our core business to work in the supply chain, but we want to understand it better so we can know how to support our alums. So just knowing all the different players, being able to map them out, understand who does what, where does each thing flow to, that took some time. There's obviously, costs involved in getting to find these farmers, getting time. For example, we had to push the study back several months because of the harvest season. So during harvest, nobody has any spare moment. So I think we learned a lot about kind of the fluctuations in the life cycle of these farmers and how they work. We had some challenges with our survey design, which also helped us figure out how we would do this better in the future. So we learned some ways about kind of how farmers work to help us better ask questions. We spent a lot of time on the front end designing the survey with some experts to help who had more experience working with farmers, but I think we still learned a lot about how to ask the questions better next time, so we get a little bit closer to what we're looking for.
That's great. So Sean submitted this question in the chat. He said, do you find that entrepreneurs start with a motivation to make an impact beyond themselves, Or is this motivation developed or discovered later on the entrepreneurial journey, perhaps after achieving success? Yvette, do you want to speak to that one?
I think that the content of our programs are so meaningful because it helps the entrepreneur to think about this, to realize that there is a purpose to your enterprise. So we are able to expose them to understand, what does God have? How do I integrate my faith into my gifting? And as we say, it's entrepreneurship, you know, as an expression of what God has deposited in you. And that is what is so unique about our programs. Therefore, our entrepreneurs are able to, I think that they are motivated. It's possible that earlier on they have the desire, but the question is, how do you equip the desire? And how do you equip them to be more effective in making a difference? And really, that is, in my view, what makes for transformational businesses. And so that's what we're all about, building, encouraging our entrepreneurs to build transformational businesses and giving them tools to do that.
I totally agree. And I'll also just share that I think something that we really learned over the years of doing entrepreneurship training is a lot of what we're doing is exactly what Yvette said, is helping entrepreneurs develop this growth mindset in thinking about their business, not just as a tool. A lot of small businesses come through our program thinking, you know, I want a better livelihood for my family. I'm going to hire 1-2 people. But this growth mindset of seeing your business as a tool for impact, as a tool for furthering the kingdom and transforming your community, that mindset is not, I would say it's not often there. It's sometimes there. And our programs really drive hard on that. And that's one of the biggest transformations we see in mindsets of entrepreneurs who come through our program. I think you also have a lot of, you know, there is a lot of splash in the investing community around certain sectors. Farmers will always be a targeted beneficiary group of business support and investment support. But I think what's exciting for me also is there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are also thinking strategically, like I mentioned, about their suppliers, about their vendors, about people in the supply chain that they're kind of actively thinking about impacting. And again, I don't think that's something a lot of people come in thinking about, but that's something that they leave our programs thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I didn't mention in the introduction, I lived in Kenya from 2016 to 2018, spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs in the classroom and in the field. And I think it is somewhat of a nuanced thing. Sometimes people would come to Sinapis because this was precisely the thing they had already determined they wanted to develop. I think more commonly, it was a yearning, but probably not really understanding, what does this look like in practice? Who are people that I could rub shoulders with who are further ahead of me on that journey? And what are some tools that you could help me use to think through things like a kingdom business plan that would live alongside my business plan, or asset-based community development? If you're familiar with that, we include that in our content so that entrepreneurs are looking for, what assets has God already placed in the community? How can we leverage those for growth? And it's just a different perspective on the purpose of business and the value of the calling to the marketplace. And I think that's a game changer for a lot of people who may feel like, maybe I'm a second-class citizen in a way in the kingdom because I'm not a pastor, I'm not a missionary, I'm not a worship leader. And the irony is, for us who are passionate about wanting to see lives be transformed, so we look at them and say, a business dedicated to God where you really love people is one of the most effective engines for growth that we've ever seen. And so we try to couple really good hard skill training and acceleration with these practical tools and mindset shifts so people can say, wow, this really is possible. And again, Rabboni is one example of a company that we work with that's doing a really nice job of that. And again, a competitive, complex business. So Doug submitted this question. Do you have a thought about at what point an entrepreneur sees this multiplier potential? Is there a milestone or a predictable point where that emerges? I think in a way it's kind of building on this question. Sylvie or Yvette, you want to speak to that? And he came on, he put his video on, so We can see him.
Um,
Doug's a good friend of ours.
Yvette, I
Doug
can-
serves on our advisory board.
That's great. So let me start, and then Sylvie is going to build on to that, because this is really tied. You know, every year we engage with our alumni, and there are some questions that we do ask. And through this engagement, we get a lot of insight on the levels of impact. And just looking at some of the slides that Matthew had shared earlier on, there is impact in terms of growth as a business. There is impact in terms of spiritual growth. And there's also impact in terms of social impact. So we identify these markers, especially those who are impacting very highly and at a very quick rate. Those really, that's the first point of entry in terms of identifying the multipliers. So you want to take it up from there?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we do a lot of business competitions at Sinapis, which have really helped us understand, like, how do you select entrepreneurs with the highest potential? Like, how do we figure out who goes into our accelerator, who we want to work with? And I think it's less about the stage of business that they're at and more about their understanding of kind of where they're at and what their potential is. So do they have a clear understanding of their product, of the market? Is there a market fit? Has their traction been, and I know I'm kind of sharing things that you know from the perspective of who's kind of ready for investment, but I think it's more about this, again, growth mindset and being on the right trajectory to grow. And this kind of like having demonstrated this kind of passion, thinking beyond just what they're doing with their profits and being able to show that they really share that vision for impacting the community. So I think it's not a milestone in terms of size of business. I think it's something that you really have to spend time working with them to understand, which is one reason why we do this business competitions, because it really helps us get a lot of one-on-one time with these entrepreneurs and understand who has that drive, who has that passion, who's making that traction, and how can we get behind them. So that's what I would share.
It's an interesting question, and I might just add a little bit to it. I think it's right that this is an intrinsic desire that an entrepreneur would embrace. And by the way, Multiplier, we just think of economic, social, and spiritual transformation. Or one way, I've been mulling this for a while. When Jesus talked about the parable of the sower or the soils, the good soil produced, if you remember, 30, 60, 100-fold increase. We are looking for entrepreneurs that God has raised up from inside the culture. These are local leaders who want that type of impact for the kingdom. So he's doing something in them. And we think training and community and discipleship and all of that pours into it, but they have to have that desire. I do think embedded in your question though, Doug, which is interesting, is profitability is essential. And there is a real demand in the business, right? I'm seeing you nod. There's a demand that we've got to get the business model to work. So when I say it's essential for human flourishing. I said earlier, every church, every nonprofit, every government ultimately depends on the free cash flow that businesses generate. And so in ways, this can be hard for people to embrace at the entrepreneurial level, or investors or philanthropists or others who say, wow, you're asking people to hold a lot of things together there. And it's true. But if we think of the kingdom of God as really integrated, an entrepreneur who has that desire, but really sees the company has to work in order to create jobs, to sustain them, to have impact in the community, to be an engine for the local church. So I do think a bit of a nuanced answer. They've got to have that mindset, but then they've really got to get the business model to work. And hopefully that all kind of comes as God's leading at once, but I imagine for some it comes later. But certainly the pressure that they feel of, we've got to make sure this company works, is really central. And we affirm that. We don't see that as somehow a less spiritual way of thinking. Does anybody else have any questions? Or Doug, if you've got anything you want to pick up on that. All right, well, not hearing any, this may be the only meeting that you were scheduled for today that is going to end early. But thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you joining us. It's exciting for us to do a study like this, to continue. We're on a learning journey. We deeply, deeply desire to understand, what does lasting, robust kingdom impact look like in these markets? we're convinced that entrepreneurs and the companies that they create and they grow play a vital role in the kingdom. This idea of direct, dependent, and now indirect impact is a part of our growing understanding of what that can look like. We're going to do more work on it, but really appreciate you joining. If you've got any follow-up questions, I think Andrew's putting some resources in the chat, or if you'd like to reach out to me, I'm matthew@sinapis.org, but would love to talk more, but really appreciate your time, and hope you have a great rest of your day.